Overlord. Volume 16, Chapter 5. Kill Steal, Part 2A. The theocracy's assault turned fiercer, finally breaking through the capital's outer defenses. Seeing that the theocracy's soldiers had begun entering the city, Ins and his party started to move quickly. The first thing Ins did after infiltrating the castle under Perfect Unknowable was to find an elf who was alone with no witnesses around and capture them. After passing up multiple opportunities because of the possibility of being discovered, he finally captured a female elf who looked like a servant. Ins immediately charmed her and returned to the twins' location using gate. Then, he questioned her just like they did with the elf before. Unfortunately, they weren't able to get much useful information out of the woman. Realizing there was no more useful information to be gained from the elf, Ins immediately killed her with death without hesitation. There shouldn't be any problem with a single woman disappearing from a castle that was going to fall soon. After divesting the elf of her clothes and other things that could be used to identify her, they moved her body to a faraway place, to the place they initially discovered the Ursus Lord using gate. The wild animals would probably pick her clean. Even if she was discovered before that, she would just be a mysterious corpse without a single wound. It's very unlikely that someone would connect it with Ins and the others. He thought it would be more natural to teleport her above the castle and have her die from the fall, as it would have been a reasonable action for her in this situation. However, given that they might need to use her identity later, he just made her disappear. Some MP exhaustion was necessary to deal with the body, but with Ins's MP recovery rate in mind, it was not a big deal. Plus, even if he wanted to wait until it recovered, they didn't have any time left to observe things from the sidelines anymore. The theocracy's forces were still having a hard time against the elves' guerrilla warfare in the city. That said, considering the difference in their fighting strength, their victory was just a matter of time. No strong individual had appeared on the field yet, so it was probably correct of them to think that there was no one like that present here. The Elf King, who was said to be a strong person, was nowhere to be found on the defending side, probably because he had already escaped from this place. In that case, the magic items would have followed him, rendering their actions here into a meaningless endeavor. Ins muttered such thoughts internally and then called out to the twins. Well, let's move. They now knew the general position of their destination, but it was unfortunate that they didn't manage to find out the abilities and items of the king, who was known as the strongest individual in this kingdom. Maybe they should have chosen a more important looking elf, but there wasn't enough time to carefully select their target. There's only one problem left. How should we know, to be more accurate, who should be the one to conceal themselves? In this hostile territory, each of them moving independently was out of the question. They had acted out of sight up to this point, so moving brazenly in the open now would render all those efforts meaningless. It would then be best if all three of them moved in stealth. They certainly had the means to do that, but it also created a new problem. Aura was the only one who could sense Ins in Perfect Unknowable, and even then, she could only sense that he was somewhere around them. Druids have a spell to see through Perfect Unknowable, but Mari, who mostly specialized in the use of offensive spells barring a few exceptions, didn't have that particular one. If Aura went into stealth with her Gilly cloak, even Ins and Mari couldn't find her. The Sunlight Dapple cloak that Mari usually equipped had extremely high stealth capabilities outdoors, especially in the forests, but its ability would be reduced to half while indoors. Unfortunately, it seemed like this place was considered indoors even though the castle was made out of trees, reducing the cloak's ability to the point where even Ins could sense him more or less. If both Aura and Ins could sense Mari's location, it was highly likely that the enemy could as well, so it would be meaningless. This meant, if Ins hid, Aura could find him but Mari couldn't. If Aura hid, both Ins and Mari couldn't find her. Mari's Sunlight Dapple cloak was weakened, and even if he used the Gilly cloak, the result should be about the same. It's highly possible that a third party could discover him as well. They finally concluded that if the three of them could not move covertly together, one of them should hide to act as their trump card in an emergency. While Aura was the most appropriate one for the role, it would be troublesome if Maruyama couldn't grasp her location in a pinch. If they were too unlucky, they might even end up crashing into her while trying to move. This is really a large mistake on my part. They had a week of time to prepare. They absolutely should have discussed this before coming here. INS went through such stealth operations many times in Yggdrasil. For example, during Nazarik's first clear, they had to secretly travel through the Tveg-filled swamps. But, all of his guildmates generally prepared their own measures for stealth operations. As everyone was generally used to it, a little talk before taking action worked well enough for them even if they didn't discuss it before. INS got a little excited at the word kill steal because it made him remember things from Yggdrasil, so he completely forgot about discussing the plan with the twins. Then why didn't the other two point it out to him? He didn't confirm if his hunch was true since that would be scary for him, but they were probably thinking that Insama probably has some plans with full trust in him. Actually, their eyes were gazing upon him with absolute faith right at this moment. He couldn't tell them that he had no plans right now. He spun his non-existent brain matter at full speed enough to heat up his also imaginary brains. INS could instead ask them about what they should do right now, but they couldn't waste time here, so he should propose his idea first. Then I will use perfect unknowable, Aura will be the vanguard. INS decided. The twins would not hide. They would just have to rely on Aura's senses to avoid others. If something unexpected were to happen, the twins would face them openly with INS ready to support them at any moment. He was more worried about them becoming separated during an attack than he was about them being discovered by someone, because they wouldn't be able to find each other in the first case. The twins raised no objections. Is it really fine? You can speak your mind if you notice something you know. Honestly, INS would be happier if they had any objections. 3 heads together instead of using INS alone would probably come up with a better plan. There was also the possibility that the twins agreed just because it was INS's plan. Strictly speaking, they were throwing the responsibility onto him. If INS overlooked something or his plans failed, which was a common enough occurrence, what were they going to do? They probably wouldn't say anything even if things went awry, but that was most definitely not a good thing. That's the problem with the NPCs. But, even if I force them to squeeze out some ideas here, there isn't enough time. Let's just ignore this problem for now and be more cautious the next time around. He explained various countermeasures to Aura and Mari, and then walked after them into the castle with his spell active. There were barely any elves, just like when INS infiltrated alone before, so they didn't meet anyone on the way. Of course, the fact that Aura was listening to the footsteps around them and timing their movements so that they would avoid them was also a major factor in this situation. There were barely any people in the kingdom's royal castle during its last moments as well, but they worked to create barricades at the entrances at least. There were no such things here even though the theocracy was on their doorsteps. In fact, the mood here felt like nothing unusual was happening outside at all. It doesn't feel like they intend to defend it. As I expected, did the country's upper echelons leave the city to its own devices and escape already? From what I've heard, there doesn't seem to be any other elven countries around here, but the Great Sea of Trees is rather huge. It's entirely possible that there are lands further south with cities and we just don't know about them. All this trouble would be for nothing if that's the case. Anyhow, they would have an answer soon. It would be dumb of him to continue thinking about matters they could do nothing about. The restricted area, likely the treasury, seemed to be on the upper floors. It was 2 floors above the one where the king's personal room was, and it was the highest point in the castle. He initially thought about entering it from the outside, but abandoned the idea when he considered that it was unlikely that such a place had windows. And so, the 3 of them continued to advance up the stairs. They climbed the floors without getting discovered. Upon reaching the floor of their destination, Aura raised her voice with a hint of suspicion. What is this place even? The entire ceiling, which was about 15 meters high, was filled with lights covering all of its surfaces. There weren't any windows around, so there was no doubt that it was done through some kind of magic. But, it wasn't bright enough to be called dazzling. Ins moved his body a little to try and see if he received any debuffs. It would appear that this was not the kind of light the priests would use that negatively affected the undead. Considering that this was the elven country, it was probably some divine magic related to the druids. The phenomenon itself wasn't that weird. After all, Nazarik's sixth floor was similar. Even arcane magic and psychic magic had light-emitting spells after all, but the lack of secondary effects made it hard to know which type of magic this light belonged to. But that was not what made Aura raise her voice. It was the thing directly opposite the ceiling, the floor, which was completely covered with soil. Most of the floor, free of any walls or partitions and about 100 meters wide in every direction, was covered by soil. There were some areas free of the soil coverage, but the area around the huge door further in was completely covered. Aura lightly kicked the soil a few times and turned some over. It didn't take that long before she hit the floor beneath it. It wasn't that deep. A substitute for a carpet, maybe. Hearing that, Ins felt like that was probably the case. The Dark Elf village didn't have a culture of using carpets either. They at most used some floor cushions weaved from grass. Wait, no, culture is a diverse topic, but doesn't this feel a bit primitive? Or is this a measure of caution? To make intruders leave their footprints? But, in that case, shouldn't there be a patrol or a guard watching this area? Ins concurred with Mari's words. There didn't seem to be anyone around here. Too careless, to think no one's here. No, maybe even the ones who were here were mobilized to defend against the theocracy's assault? That servant said this area was restricted, though nothing about soldiers being stationed here. Maybe they plan to cultivate vegetables and stuff if they ever need to hole up in the castle. Aura raised an eye in agreement with Mari's hypothesis. Ins agreed as well. It was possible for druids to cultivate crops here even though there wasn't any sunlight coming in. Maybe this light substituted for real sunlight to grow plants here. Though the area Aura kicked over was shallow, it was near the edge. It was possible that the soil further in was deep enough to grow plants. I can test this better if someone like Shaltir, who receives a penalty from sunlight, was with us here. I could use all appraisal magic item if it's a magic item, but if they didn't find anything good in the treasury, they can try taking this along with them as a consolation. Ins settled on that decision and started walking after the twins. Those two used skills to not leave any footprints behind, while Ins cast Fly while maintaining perfect unknowable to do the same. As the group neared the center of the room, I felt some strange presence and came over to check, but to think it was some dark elves. Twin kids at that. A voice suddenly spoke. Turning back, they found an elf standing about 10 meters away from them. He had a cold-looking but handsome face, with each eye being a different color. He was definitely not a servant. They could feel that this elf was used to ordering others around. One could feel the haughtiness that was radiated around him. What? Ins let out a surprised voice that no one else could hear. There shouldn't have been anyone there. He was sure. Ins and Mari may have missed him, but there's no way Aura would have as well. He had not been invisible either. Ins would have seen him if that was the case. Maybe he deceived Ins's eyes with a special concealment skill while using invisibility at the same time to hide from Aura. Or else he teleported here. Shit. I should have deployed delay teleportation. Aura moved gracefully to position herself between Ins and that elf while Mari took on a fighting stance, gripping his staff with his two hands. In contrast to the twins, the elf didn't change his stance at all. Ins found him full of gaps, but maybe that was the opponent's attempt to bait them. A skilled warrior could probably judge if he was being genuine or if it was a bluff, but Ins couldn't. Ins moved a little and tried waving his hand at the elf. The elf didn't turn his gaze at all. So, he couldn't see through Ins's perfect unknowable. Ins turned to look at the twins. His orders before the infiltration were, in case we were to meet any mysterious individual, focus on gathering intel from them until they attack us. Aura nonchalantly extended her hand to grasp her necklace. The twins probably intended to gather the information while having a discussion among themselves. He could understand their intentions, but they were being a bit rash. If it were Ins, he would have immediately attacked the infiltrators if they made any suspicious movements before him. Touching equipment was the same as drawing a gun in his eyes. Expecting the mysterious elf to start attacking them at any moment, Ins readied himself to meet him with magic at any time. But, he ended up tilting his head in puzzlement after observing the elf. There's no change in the elf's attitude. He saw Aura's actions but didn't look like he was particularly bothered by them. Was it because he was highly confident in his strength, or was it because he couldn't understand what Aura was doing? Or maybe he was trying to gather information just like they were and so was hesitating to attack them. What's the meaning of this? Those eyes. I don't remember betting any dark elves. No, maybe I did? HMM. Let me test you then. The elf's air of intimidation became stronger. It even felt like the elf had swelled up a little. TCH, Aura clicked her tongue. Body of effulgent barrel. Hoo. So you can withstand this? This is probably the first time ever that I've seen someone being able to do that. Hey, why did you point killing intent at us? Do you want to die? Indomitability. Ha. The elf laughed like he had just heard the greatest joke. Aura furrowed her brows in a manner that screamed danger. She made a fist with a scary amount of force behind it, but gradually loosened it as Ins continued to watch. Greater resistance. That was splendid. No, I see. I never even had an inkling. Grandchildren, I see. I understand now. So even if it doesn't awaken in the children, it could awaken the grandchildren's generation. To think that I didn't realize it, that was somewhat stupid of me. What nonsense are you muttering about? Greater potential. No, it just means I had the right idea all along. Well then, my grandchildren. Grandchildren? What the heck is he saying? He seems to be having some sort of misunderstanding. No way, are you Byukyubuku Kagami-samas? That made Ins panic for a moment. He realized that there was a possibility that Byukyubuku Kagama had arrived in this world alone and left this guy behind. But there doesn't seem to be any slime bits left in him. Maybe he can change his form like solution. Chagama? What are you talking about? No? In that case, could it be Akimishin-san? Yamaiko had a sister named Akimishin. She had made an elf character, but as she wasn't that into Yggdrasil, he barely knew anything about her. You there, you are a pure elf, right? Oops. Breath of magic caster. What is this odd question? There's no way you don't know who I am, right? We know. Why yes. We know. The two of you are shit at acting. Their perfunctory attitude and the monotone reply were enough to make Ins retort unintentionally. The elf didn't believe them either, opening his mouth in surprise. To think that you didn't know, it's impossible, good grief. I heard dark elves live near the borders, but to think you are so uncultured. The elf sent them an intense glare. I will forgive this once because you are my grandchildren, but ignorance is a sin. I will educate you thoroughly under my guidance. Even if you say you will teach us, wait, actually, who are you? I am just making sure, but you are the king of the elves, right? Aura likely made that conjecture because the elf king was the only strong person they were informed about. Life essence? Who? Ins let out a voice in surprise. The elf's HP pool was huge. It easily surpassed the Pleiades and was probably at least level 70 by Yggdrasil's standards. This made him an opponent they couldn't be careless around. Ha! I am stunned. What did your parents teach you until now? There shouldn't be anything more important than the name of the pinnacle of all the elven races, at present anyway, and the king of the elves, the DCM Kugane. Shit! Ins cursed. He expected this, but he couldn't help but curse after receiving confirmation. All their effort until now to stay hidden was in vain. He could only lament at all of their wasted efforts. Now, they would have to kill this person, the greatest combat entity probably in this nation, one that they could have expected to decimate the forces of their hypothetical enemy nation, the theocracy. They certainly couldn't leave him alive after this. Overwriting his memories was one option if they could incapacitate him and make him unable to resist, but after seeing his life essence, Ins realized that this king's battle strength, his HP to be more precise, was surprisingly huge for a denizen of this world. Of course, they would win without a doubt if they fought normally. There are 3 level 100 entities here after all, but it would probably be hard to incapacitate him without killing him, as holding back here could turn out to be a mistake. Considering his sudden appearance, it's highly likely that this elf DCM had some abilities unknown to them. It was dangerous to prioritize incapacitating him when they didn't have enough information on his true strength. After seeing that Akimishin's name wasn't mentioned, he was 90% sure that there was no relation between them. If there was any, she would have named him something recognizable. He would only kill him if they were driven to the wall, if he really was the Yamaiko household's child. The king? Is it fine for you to be here? Aren't the humans attacking? Why won't you immediately go over there and save your people? Mana essence. I see. Even DCM's mana was quite high for this world's denizens. It was about the same as Shalter's. HP and MP. Taking elven culture into account, he most likely had the same class as Mari, a druid. A backline druid, to be specific. Why should I do something like that? Seems like you are misunderstanding what being a king means. A king is someone who should be venerated as a supreme existence by his people, not someone who works for them. Mercy is the only thing the superiors give to those inferior. Understood? And mercy can only be pleaded for, not demanded. They should be satisfied even if they don't receive it. What the hell was this guy saying? Ins was stunned. If DCM was really being serious, then there's something wrong with his brain. Ins even found the elves pitiful for having such a king. So you don't feel like saving them? But, well, I can agree with a part of what you said. Why yes. We can't say he is entirely wrong either. Ha! Ins stared at the twins' faces, flabbergasted at their replies. It didn't seem like a tactic to loosen the opponent's tongue by flattering him. Which part of his utterance did they think was acceptable? And no, maybe it's me who was in the wrong? Maybe that is how a king should think? Jerkniv also had an air like that about him. How was the Kwagoa king like? That one was too servile. Who? As expected of my grandchildren. Even though unlearned, your minds can understand the truth. Ah, not again. I wasted time. I have my own tasks to do. Magic ward, fire. But you made one big, critical mistake. Only the supreme beings can be objects of veneration, not a small fry elf like you. Well, you can get venerated however you want as long as it's only the elves around here, I guess. No, that's completely wrong. But they won't change even if I reproach them, and it's not like I don't understand their feelings. If only they made friends outside of Nazarick. From this point of view, I have hopes for Shizu, who became friends with that girl with the scary eyes. This trip was a failure, unfortunately. No, considering our talk on the way back, even Shizu's a bit, as I thought, only Saba's ah. I am thinking about useless things again. What? Supreme beings? Did dark elves have such oral traditions? DCM pondered a bit and slightly shook his head. Well, whatever. I can just hear about it in detail later. Do you really have the time for it? Like I said before, isn't the human country knocking on your doors right now? Ins was flustered at the time he had wasted, so he immediately cast the next spell. False data life. Right at that moment, a rumbling came from under them, shaking the floor. It looked like the theocracy finally brought out the siege engines. The twins and DCM turned to look at the floor and closed their mouths. INS continued to cast magic. False data mana. TCH. Humans are really troublesome. I could go over and wipe them out myself, but it's bothersome. Let's go. Where are you telling us to go? Penetrate up. I haven't thought about it, but, well, nowhere should be a problem with my strength. To think you had no plans, aren't you the worst? And what are you going to do if we follow you? Is it Earth? It would be a waste if I got it wrong. INS hesitated for a moment before taking out a scroll and activating it. Earth Master. Ah, DCM stared intensely at Aura's body. You are still a child, hey. It will be some time before you mature, but there's nothing to be done about it. I have already waited for this long. A few decades was too long to be seen as a mere miscalculation, but we will just have to think of it as inconsequential. You asked what will happen if you come along, right? That answer is simple. You will have children with me. Eh? What are you even talking about? Ah? Greater luck. You too, DCM turned his gaze to Marie. After the women become pregnant, it takes time before they can bear a child again. I expect more from you on that account. You will also be making multiple children alongside me. I assume the blood will be further diluted, but seeing how it awoke in the grandchildren's generation, it should be possible for the great-grandchildren as well. I should take time to experiment. Ah, it will be troublesome, but I will probably have to take some people along with us to become your partners. But, why are you wearing a female's attire even though you are a boy? Is it the Dark Elves' tradition? Honestly, the fact that you are not a pure elf is a bit irritating, but it's far better than extending my hand to all the humanoid races. Aura and Marie stared at DCM with their mouths agape. Well, I don't mind if you don't understand it yet. Let's go. He was unsure what DCM was thinking, but he approached the twins who stood rooted to their place and extended his hand towards Aura. INS brushed that hand away. Determining the action as an attack, perfect unknowable got dispelled. Before DCM could turn to look at INS in surprise, his bony fist planted itself in DCM's face. DCM flew away, sprawling on the ground. This pedashi! To think you dare to stare lecherously at the girl entrusted to me by my friend. Die! While he continued to hurl abuse, the small part of him that managed to stay cool clicked his tongue at his mistake. He went through all that trouble to maintain perfect unknowable, but ended up throwing a punch because he lost his temper. There's nothing more wasteful than this. INS emotions would be suppressed if they cross a certain line. He would have acted more rationally just now had that been triggered. Instead of punching the guy, he would have cast instant death magic on him. However, it didn't trigger, probably because he was more disgusted than angry. The extent of that emotion probably didn't cross the line either. Wah! DCM stood up in a fluster, with blood flowing from his nostrils. But, he didn't receive much damage. Life essence showed INS that only a little bit of his HP was gone. Even though he received INS's full-powered punch defenselessly, that's all it managed to do to him. There's a possibility that he was faking it with a skill like false data life or some equipment, but that was most likely not the case. INS showed his open palm to the twins, making a pose to tell them not to move. From his estimates of DCM's HP and MP, he seemed to be above level 70 but below level 80. That said, although it's very unlikely, they should be on guard against one possibility. Yggdrasil had no such classes, but maybe this world had some that wouldn't raise HP and MP when leveling up. Those could make it possible so that someone is at level 100, but their MP and HP would stay at level 70. He would probably be right in assuming that there was nothing like that, but there is no such thing as an absolute. The three of us can gang up and kill him, but that's a bad idea for now. At least not until we figure out the method behind his teleportation. While INS continued to think up their battle tactics for the hereafter, DCM raised his voice. A new undead? Why, here, and so suddenly? He turned his gaze to the twins. Is one of you a necromancer? Ins answered before the two could speak. Just like you have surmised. These two are peerless necromancers, and I am their guardian who was born from the power of these two and their parents, from the combined powers of 4 people. I will definitely not allow the weak to touch them. I wouldn't mind you taking them away on the dawn of the day you defeated me. Buttons used his full effort to laugh scornfully, trying to anger the opponent. Well, I think that's impossible for you, right? Who? DCM removed his hand that had been pressing down on his nose. It seemed like the bleeding had already stopped. I am a little surprised. To make me bleed, how many decades, no, centuries has it been? I see. You are strong enough to match your boast, but that's not the way to speak to a king. That said, this is rather fortunate. Rejoice, I shall teach you the difference between our strengths and discipline you. He said those words while looking at Aura and Marie. It looked like he really believed Ins. So, Ins continued to think. Why did it look like DCM believed his, the enemy's, words without a doubt? Did he really not have any abilities that could see through invisibility? If he had any, it should have crossed his mind that Ins suddenly appearing was not because he was summoned, but because he was hiding using something like invisibility. If he really didn't, then he was probably a specialized druid like Marie. Or, in case this was all an act and he knew I was already here, a bluff in a sense. What is he aiming for? He wanted to simulate what he would do if he was in that guy's place, but spending too much time pondering on it would look suspicious. Then why don't we fight one-on-one, fair and square? That should make it easier for my masters to understand who is stronger, you or them, right? DCM widened his eyes and laughed like he just heard an interesting joke. Meanwhile, Ins used the silent metamagic to send a message to Marie. Marie. That was a big lie just now. If it looks like I am in a bad situation, cooperate with me to absolutely kill that guy. Pass that along secretly to Aura as well. Obviously, he had no intentions of handing the twins over to the guy. Also, fighting one-on-one, fair and square in a fight with one's life on the line was an act of utmost stupidity. Some battles were fine to lose, but not those where people were trying to take each other's lives. But Ins felt like he had made a mistake. He wanted to spend a little more time buffing himself, but there was no way he would let a pervert like that touch Aura. The elf also could have had skills to force teleportation that Ins didn't know about, which would have been dangerous if he had let him touch her. The sight of you two commanding an undead made me sure that you are my grandchildren. Then, the floor moved. Like waves receding back from the beach, the soil roiled towards DCM. Ignoring it, Ins took out a scroll from under his clothes with deliberate movement and activated it. It was extremely wasteful, but he had no other choice. Until he knew how much the opponent knew, he couldn't let the enemy get cautious. The activated magic was the 8th tier spell, Dimensional Lock. This spell had the same effect as the special ability used by extra-dimensional beings like devils and angels. It blocked beings from teleporting out of a specific range with instant teleportation magic. While he was doing this, the earthen lump that coalesced before DCM turned into something huge. It was in the form of an elemental that Ins knew. He could hear a gasp of surprise from Marie, but Ins was surprised as well. A primal elemental. Upon seeing the elemental that couldn't be summoned by normal means before him, Ins instantly raised his level of caution. Unlike Marie, Ins suppressed his sound of surprise from leaking out. One of the fundamental teachings of PKing for Dummies was that you couldn't let others find out that you knew. Marie's surprise could be misunderstood as a kid's terror at seeing the elemental, but in Ins's case, it would make it clear that he had knowledge about it. So Ins lowered his shoulders in an exaggerated manner. HNN. So what? You created a big lump of soil called an earth elemental? Are you going to make it fight me instead of fighting by yourself? Aren't you underestimating me? Ho ho. So, you know what this is? DCM smiled haughtily. Good. Of course. That's just an earth elemental, right? I destroyed one that was summoned against me in the past. Well, that wasn't nearly as large as the one here, so you should be quite strong to be able to control one so large. Size is one of the marks of strength after all, but size is not everything. Yes. You are correct. Dragon lords who only have their large bodies to speak of can be defeated by elves after all, but I am surprised. Your knowledge is not incorrect. You were right that this is an earth elemental. Ha ha ha. You're discerning, I know, memory. I would bow to it. DCM's clearly scornful grin deepened further. This is a rare chance, so why don't you take a blow with your body? A blow from an elemental you called trivial. The primal elemental slowly raised its fist. It should move faster if it was a primal earth elemental. Was this intentional? Well, I am thankful for it. Its behavior, like a cat playing with its prey, was a welcome thing for ins. Isn't this the best? While hiding his smile, of course, his face won't move in the first place. Ins tried to recollect primal earth elemental's abilities. The primal earth elemental that was over level 80 played the tank role among the primal elementals of the same level. No, fundamentally, all earth elementals filled the same role. Its attacks were considered to have nearly all of the metallic attributes under its level to be included in them. For example, if beings like Lupus Regina who had a weakness against silver got hit by it, it would trigger that weakness. Also, as long as both the opponent and itself stood on Earth, it would have a bonus to all of its stats, even though meager. But, that shouldn't work now, as the original floor that was exposed after all of the soil had collected near DCM was made from plant material. It also supposedly had the ability to hide in soil, but that couldn't be used here either. All things considered, he could say that this was not a good battlefield for the primal earth elemental. What he should be on guard for were the punches from those fists. It was a simple way of attacking, but it was highly destructive. They were not exactly fast or precise, but it was hard for a backliner like Ins to evade them. Furthermore, it does bludgeoning damage, which was particularly effective against Ins. It could also extend its arms like whips and do long-range attacks, but in that case, its power would go down a lot. Just like its attacks, its defense was also supposed to have metal attributes imbued. It also had weapon resistance V against all weapons and physical damage reduction on top of that. Considering all of the above, it was the ideal tank and was troublesome to deal with using only physical attacks. That said, it also had some weak points, naturally. For example, it didn't have any dangerous trump cards, that is, it had no special skills. That meant that it had no attack that could turn the tide in a battle. The other weak point was that everything that worked against metallic attributes worked the same on the elemental. Harahiro-san could probably take it down easily. It was weak to acids, and there was one more element it was weak against. Ins made preparations to take out the staff from his inventory when needed. He wouldn't be taking it out yet though. Since the opponent was assuming that he was just a simple undead, he should play along and not display any skills that would put him on guard. The question was whether or not he should take the incoming hit or not. It would make for a good act if he made it look like that single attack was what made the undead being realize that this was no simple earth elemental. The demerit in this scenario would be that the enemy would turn cautious after seeing that one serious blow wasn't enough to kill Ins. Right. There's no doubt that he is specialized in summoning. The earth elemental's attack will be more powerful than usual. It will be disadvantageous for the fight hereafter if I receive damage for no reason. In that case, what I should be doing here is Wall of Skeleton. Ins created a huge wall made of bones in front of him at the same time the elemental brought its fist down. The wall was instantly destroyed and disappeared into thin air. As I expected, did his mana just go down? What is this? Ins exclaimed in a voice loud enough for the elf to hear. Why can it destroy my wall in a single hit? Ha ha ha. To think it was broken in a single hit from a simple earth elemental, isn't your wall too brittle? Taking advantage of DCM's good spirits, Ins immediately shot a spell at him. Lopsided Duel. This was a third-tier spell that made the caster teleport to the same place as the person he cast it on if they tried to escape by teleportation. Furthermore, even if the opponent was protected by delay teleportation, it would still ignore it and instantly teleport the caster at the same time. Still, this obviously had a fatal weakness. If the opponent teleported right into the middle of his comrades, the caster who followed them would also teleport to the same place and would end up as their punching bag. That was why, even though it looked like an extremely useful spell at first glance, it was relegated to the third tier. Before it was patched, it could be cast on allies to teleport along with them. After it was patched out, the spell could only be cast on enemies. So, Ins should be prepared to escape if there were people on the same level as DCM waiting at the place he would teleport to. Luckily, Lopsided Duel had the small mercy of not taking the enemy along with the caster if it was the caster who used teleportation instead, so it would not be that difficult to escape. What did you do? I cast an instant death spell. I see, so you already have measures against instant death. Well, it looks like you are somewhat intelligent, so you tried to deal with me after seeing that you can't win against Behemoth. But, do you really think that I am weaker than the elemental? Summoners being weaker than their summons is impossible in Yggdrasil, but you are probably the lower leveled one here. Keeping that aside, why didn't he answer my question even though he is looking down on me as a weakling? Is it because he really had no anti-instant death measures? And, what is this Behemoth? DCM jerked his chin, making the primal earth elemental lift its fists again. It was far quicker compared to the last time. He could also hear DCM cast a spell at the same time. Mercy of Shoria Robusta. Tch. His use of 10th tier magic was within my predictions, but that's a really troublesome spell. Now I will have to use twinned metamagic to kill him. Mercy of Shoria Robusta was a 10th tier spell, and its mana consumption was one of the highest among them, on the level of Reality Slash. This spell had 3 effects. First, for a limited period of time, it would gradually recover HP. However, the recovery rate was trivial and so it was hard to call it useful for people at this level range. The second one was absolute immunity against instant death. There were far better spells in the third tier if one only wanted to acquire resistance against instant death, but there was a reason why a lot of druids learned this spell despite that. That reason was the third effect, which automatically resurrected the target when their HP reached 0 and died. This would not cause a drop in levels from resurrection. The trigger condition of HP going to 0 made it useless against deaths that weren't caused by damage like those by drowning, but it was still a very useful spell. Priests had resurrection spells that wouldn't cause level loss if they were cast right after death. Druids also had spells like Phoenix Flame, but many used this spell to cover for any careless mistakes. That said, they would be at low health upon resurrection, so they were very likely to die anyway after a few hits. Still, there were a lot of cases where people were saved by this spell. Incidentally, it could avoid death from Ins's ultimate skill. The goal of all life is death, as this spell was considered resurrection magic. In that case, however, the spell would end even if there was still some active time left. It was because the spell was dispelled after it activated the resurrection portion. He is probably guarding against my bluff about using an instant death skill. I made a mistake. My bluff should have been about some magic I can't use. Let's do that next time. Triplet magic. Wall of Skeleton. As he expected, the first wall was destroyed with a single attack and the second wall soon followed. While the third wall was obstructing DCM's view, In slightly changed his position, took out a scroll, and activated it. Piercing Cacophonous. It was a buffing spell that he didn't really need right now, but he used it just to be sure. Primal Earth Elemental attacked again. The Wall of Skeleton shattered and Triplet Magic, Wall of Skeleton. At the same time the first of the 3 new walls he created was being destroyed, he heard DCM chant a spell. Aspect of Elemental. It's an 8th tier druid spell that gave resistances similar to the elementals. It gave immunity towards bad statuses like poison and disease. Other than that, it also nullified critical hits and attacks with similar effects. There was also a similar spell in the 9th tier named Elemental Form. The areas Ins specialized in were being mitigated one by one, which was troublesome. That said, how much of his mana can I exhaust? Triplet Silent Magic, Greater Magic Seal. Ins changed his position a little more. With this, he had moved 90 degrees from his initial position with DCM as the center. He was now closer to the stairs. The Primal Earth Elemental destroyed one more wall. Unfortunately, he couldn't make new walls of bone right now. Triplet Maximize boosted Silent Magic, Magic Arrow. His mana went down by a lot instantly. Naturally, even a low-tier spell would consume a lot of mana after being strengthened by 4 metamagics. If this Primal Earth Elemental was a summon, all it needed was a single successful Greater Rejection and he wouldn't need to prepare all these spells. However, if DCM really was specialized in summoner classes as he assumed, it probably wouldn't succeed in dispelling the summon even with their large level difference. Plus, Greater Rejection could only dispel summons, not creations. Could it be an elemental adjutant? If it was created by sacrificing experience, it could be maintained nearly forever. But, it looks like he was consuming mana to maintain it, so that shouldn't be the case. I can't really gamble on it though. Then, he should also be prepared for that possibility. Fina DCM stopped speaking, looked at the twins, and then looked at Ins's position with a puzzled expression. Why did you move over there? Are you planning to escape while calling yourself their guardian? TCH. Ha ha ha. Then let me lend you a hand. The Primal Earth Elemental landed a punch on Ins's defenseless back as he ran towards the stairs. The knockback caused by its gigantic fist blew Ins away. Hoo? To think you weren't smashed in a single blow, it stands to reason why you would talk big. Well, your resistance was futile in the end anyway. Ins was sent flying away, but he managed to keep his posture with fly and took his position before the stairs. But seeing that you are running away, can I assume that you are going to leave your masters behind with me? There's no way I would do that. Ins created another wall of skeleton. That again? How do you even expect to win without damaging my elemental? That is an idiotic plan you got there. Upon hearing DCM's exasperation-filled voice, Ins returned a sneer from behind his wall. Ha ha ha. I know that humans are assaulting this country right now. Hey, Elf King, don't you think time is on my side? I see. So that's how it is. Aren't you clever? But, that's meaningless. Your plan's impossible. What? Impossible, you say? Yes. Did you perhaps think that something like humans could take me down? Me, the one who controls this elemental. I was exasperated at similar words I had heard from the guy who summoned an angel in the past, but the Primal Earth Elemental is truly a top-class being. Is the Theocracy attacking while knowing DCM's strength? If that's the case, it means that they have a method to defeat him. Yet, this guy looks like he hadn't even thought of that possibility yet. Either the Theocracy is ignorant, or this guy is. But, if the Theocracy really knew DCM's strength, would that person at that time really have called that the highest angel? It's unsure what he thought about Ins contemplating silently, but DCM spoke in an utterly fed-up voice. You should have probably understood it if you thought about it a little bit, right? You really are such a shallow person. Well, maybe it can't be helped. You are an undead after all. All you have is air for brains. I don't know. If they are prepared for a fight with the elves, it stands to reason that there's someone in the Theocracy's camp on the same level as this guy at the very least. In that case, time really isn't my ally here. I want to avoid consecutive battles, but how much of his opponent's energy could he exhaust? While thinking about that, Ins cast another wall of skeleton. As he said to Mari in a message previously, fighting one-on-one is an idiotic thing to do when one really wanted to win, but he had to continue doing so this time unless he felt like he was in danger of losing. This battle also had one more irritating factor. He had to fight with a hand tied behind his back. Ins already concluded that DCM couldn't see through perfect unknowable. He could easily win if he used that. But that wasn't an option. Why? What was the most likely development if he started to have an overwhelming advantage using perfect unknowable? Or, say, what would happen if he used a high-tier spell like Time Stop and outed himself as a strong opponent? DCM would likely run upon realizing that he couldn't win. Luckily, he wouldn't direct his attacks at the twins well, he couldn't be certain of that, but it was very unlikely. That guy's aim was to capture Aura and then, Mari. It was reasonable to think that he would not cause them fatal harm. Ins didn't want to let him escape without finding how DCM teleported here. He appeared suddenly, so he could probably disappear suddenly as well. No, in fact, he should imagine the worst and assume that he had the ability to do just that. If he let this guy escape, this pervert could continue to aim for Aura and Mari forever. That was one thing he certainly couldn't let happen. The twins could be standing at a dangerous precipice depending on DCM's true strength, which he was yet to be certain about. That was why he was putting into practice what he said to them with the message. He would be sure to kill DCM here, and not give him a chance to escape. That was why Ins didn't ask the twins to help. Difference in numbers was one of the main factors that decided victory. The first thing Ins would do if he were to encounter a group of opponents of unknown strength that outnumbered his group would be to escape. He should assume that DCM would do the same. It was better not to make the enemy realize his disadvantageous situation before he could create an opportunity to take them out. So, not only did he not ask for the twins' help, but he didn't even summon any undead. His great lie about DCM being allowed to take the twins if he was defeated was also for the same reason. By restricting his opponent's actions, Ins led his opponent into not wanting to leave the battlefield and gradually made him not able to leave it even if he wanted to. So, what was it again? Yeah, the Sankua cost effect. The important thing is whether or not I can make him accumulate enough of it. I hope that he doesn't see through it. Let's just pray that he doesn't have much battle experience. I should break his will at the very least. End of Part 2A.